According to the World Bank, China's economy was on track to meet its 5% GDP growth target for 2025 and is projected at 4.4% this year. This as existing economic headwinds remain. China's role in the global economy has become increasingly important. Amid lingering uncertainty and rising protectionism, the UN says China remains a key engine of global trade and economic growth. But what impact will China have on the global economy? Later, we'll be joined by the former Chilean ambassador to China and a former vice president of the World Bank. But we begin with Yan Liang. She's a chair professor in economics at Willamette University, and Andy Mock is a senior research fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Andy, let me start with you. From 2021 to 2025, China contributed on average about 30% a year to global economic growth. Now, we see China's new policies are driving domestic consumption and investment. So looking ahead, how will China's policies affect jobs, markets, affect inflation as well across Asia and across the broader global south?
Thanks for having me on today, Anand. So I think, first of all, the structural fundamentals of China remain the same. Strong governance, enormous market, ferociously competitive domestic situation that results in globally competitive companies from China. But I think there's three things worth pointing out that make next year and the next few years different. Two of these are related to the second Trump administration. So when we saw with Liberation Day, the intent was to make China capitulate, but instead it resulted in American capitulation. And this isn't just geopolitics. I think this has a very direct impact on the trajectory of China's economy looking forward. We see now a greater American pragmatism. So initially it was to withhold key technology from China to maintain technological superiority. Now that I think the U.S. in a sense has thrown in the towel, it's taking a much more pragmatic approach. And, I think the canonical example of that is the sale of NVIDIA H200 chips to China. So I think this, again, has a positive impact on the long-term trajectory of China's growth and its impact on the global economy. The second is also related to the second Trump administration, and this is Trump's threats or promise to annex Greenland. And what this is doing is presenting the European Union with an existential crisis. And what this means then for China is that the European Union is really in a bind, and it really can't afford to fight both the U.S. and China. So I think this really limits its ability to escalate in its trade disputes with China. And I think sooner rather than later, this will lead to a more favorable regime for Chinese exports in Europe. So these two factors, I think, are very, very new and important that will give China a better growth prospects as well as greater room for expansion. And then the third is artificial intelligence. And without going too deeply into this right now, I think this absolutely will be transformational, but also very disruptive as well because of the impact it will have on the labor force. And I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit more later.
Yes, we will. And Yan Liang, good to see you. What's your view on the way ahead? I mean, global GDP growth is projected by Goldman Sachs to increase 2.8% in 2026. And if we look at growth here in the United States, it's expected to be around 2.6%. But how important will China's growth be this year in the recovery and in global growth?
Yeah, good to be with you, Anand. So I think China's economic weight has been always very important for the global economy. And so I think in the new year, China will continue to promote, its own domestic economy with, active fiscal policy. We already see some of the front loading of the policies to have a $42 billion of financing to support some of the key projects like energy, transportation, and so on. And so I think this kinds of fiscal policy will continue to help to promote its own domestic economy, and moderately loose monetary policy would also help to put the support right to its own economy. And I think externally, China will continue to both engage in unilateral opening, right, such as opening up for the Hainan free trade port, and also by extending a lot more favorable trade terms to developing countries. And we also saw China and South Korea just reached 15, official agreements to continue to expand trade, investment, and technological cooperations. And I think these kinds of actions from China will definitely help not only to support Chinese economy, but really help the regional and global economy. And I agree with Andy. I think China's technological innovations, again, not only help China's own, new productive force to drive economic growth, but really partner with other countries, right, to drive the kind of technology development that's very important for the global economy. And the geopolitics is always ever changing and it's always posing a lot of risks. But I think, China's stance is always firm and consistent, which is China will continue to uphold multilateralism and work with like-minded countries to expand trade, investment, technological partnership, and also accelerate green transition. So I think that is why I think China is really playing a vital role, especially as the United States increasingly going rogue and exit from the global governance structure. I think that is very important for China to step up to not only stabilize its own domestic economy, but also, help the rest of the world to really forge ahead.
Andy, let's look at China's signature foreign policy outreach, I should say foreign trade policy outreach, and that is the Belt and Road Initiative. It's now involved in 150 countries. It's also working with 30 organizations. BRI investment from 2013 up to now amounts to $1.3 trillion. How does the BRI fit into China's broader strategy, and where is it having the biggest impact?
Well, Anand, I think that, as you mentioned, the Belt and Road Initiative is really global in scale and is having a profound impact, not only by tangible indicators, but I think it's the philosophy and the values behind it. So, I think we can describe it as respect for mutual sovereignty, joint development without any strings attached, no ideological components to it as well. So I think whether we look at Indonesia, we look at other parts of the world, that really has had a very, very profound impact.
Yan Liang, let's get to something Andy mentioned earlier in the show, and that is innovation. Now, in the latest Global Innovation Index, that's the 2025 rankings, China entered the top 10 for the first time. China's move towards high value-added growth. Here is the Chinese Premier Li Qiang talking about that. Let's watch.
Now the investment in the technology sector is rising against a backdrop of global decline of overall investment, and this is particularly evident in China. There is a stronger desire for all parties to have collaborative innovation. Whether it's free trade, meeting challenges together, or collaborative innovation, none of these can be realized with one party working alone. For all of these, we need to embrace an open mind and work hand in hand to pursue openness and cooperation.
So, Yan Liang, what do you make of the Premier's point there that countries need to work hand in hand and pursue more open policies?
Right. Well, first of all, I think AI is really a potential, technological revolution. It is going to, not only help to transform Chinese economy, but of course the global economy. And I think that China has a lot of advantages in AI development, as we know that China is holding 60% of the AI patent. It has over half of the global AI talents. Its energy has tremendous advantages for China to continue to build models, to test them, to use it for influence. And more importantly, I think China is very quickly commercializing AI and embedding AI into hardwares and many other products, and to really take advantage of the AI-driven productivity growth. So I think that's important for China. And at the same time, because China's models are, open sourced, and so it can also help to help other countries to really narrow that AI gap. So I think that is China's contribution, right, to this AI development, and also to utilize AI for general good, right, for broader economic growth. Now, I think China is also very important and play a very important lead role in terms of global governance of AI. That's why China has pushed forward the Global AI Governance Initiative. And I think that means that, countries need to get together and set up some ground rules in terms of how to harness AI for the benefits and also minimize some of the disruptive disruptive impacts, right? Such as job displacements, as Andy hinted earlier. But I think it's way more than that, right? In terms of misinformation, disinformation, and using AI, for other military uses and so on and so forth. I think, countries would need to have this kinds of governance structure. And I think China is playing a leading role in that.
Andy, Elon Musk said that China is right now on track to outpace every country in the computing power that's going to be needed to run artificial intelligence. Of course, these are major challenges, but they also provide major opportunities. How will AI impact the global economy?
Well, Anon, I think in a number of very important ways. Most people think of artificial intelligence as a general purpose technology like electricity. So we think pre-electrification, post-electrification of the world could not be more different. But I think what's also important to point out here and to elaborate a bit on this is the disruptive impact. And the way I see China approaching this is very similar to the way China approached WTO accession, in that it ingested short-term social disruption for long-term compounding and transformational gains. And I think we could look at AI the same way. I mean, we could look at it from a technical perspective: the power generation, the data centers, the chips, the models, the applications, et cetera. And I think China's doing an incredible job of diffusion, as Yanang mentioned, partly through open source models. But I think the really important thing to keep an eye on is how China manages the social and political transition as AI truly becomes embedded in the fabric of every part of life, business, government. And I think this will serve as a model for many other countries around the world, especially in the global south.
Yang Liang, on these open source models that both you and Andy were talking about, how is China pursuing these kinds of partnerships?
Well, I think China is pursuing this through many different ways. One is this kind of open source model is able to allow other programmers and other, IT professionals to be able to develop this model and to be able to adapt to their specific uses. The other, I think, many other important, China's role here is, for example, China is providing accessible and green energies to many of the countries in the world. As you mentioned, BRI, I think a lot of it has to do with, electricity generations, especially in the green renewable energy field. And China is also, helping many other countries in upgrading their 5G network. And so that also laid the foundation of AI technologies. So in many ways, I think China is providing both the financing, the infrastructure, the technology itself, but also a lot of training, as well as, I would argue, a lot of these AI embedded products going abroad, right? Like electronics or as it, in cars. I think all of this help other countries to be able to climb up the sort of AI ladder and to be able to enjoy the benefits that AI can bring, as well as narrow the AI gap.
Okay, we are going to have to leave it there. Yang Liang, Andy Mok, thanks to both of you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anon.
Joining us now is Ottaviano Canuto. He served as Vice President of the World Bank. He's currently a Senior Fellow with the Policy Center for the New South. And Jorge Heine is the former Chilean ambassador to China. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Ambassador Heine, we have been talking about China's broad economic engagement with the world, and I want to look at some specific areas in this part of the show. And let's start with Central America. These countries in Central America, they've pursued broad economic and trade partnerships with China. How do you see the relationship evolve, and where is it having the most impact?
Well, let me say this. There is an important difference between the countries in Central America and those in South America. That difference pertains both to size. The Central American countries tend to be smaller. They also tend to have a lot fewer natural resources than South American countries. Therefore, their relationship with China is markedly different from those of, say, Brazil, Chile, or Argentina, in the sense that they are not driven by, commodities or natural resources in their trade with China, but rather by, other things, like more related to, services, more related to tourism, more related to manufacturing. So in that sense, it's a different type of relationship. I will say this: what we have seen in the course of the past few years is that at least two of those countries have signed free trade agreements with China. One of them is Costa Rica. The other is Nicaragua. Costa Rica in 2007, Nicaragua in 2024. And in some ways, we still have to wait for the impact of that. But their economic relationship with China are a lot weaker than those of South America for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Another important thing to keep in mind is that they are also much closer to the U.S. sphere of influence and much more integrated into the U.S. economy than South American countries are. So it's quite a mixed picture.
Okay, Ottaviano, China's expanding trade and economic relationships have greatly impacted the developing world. It's been a primary driver of growth in the global south. How would you characterize China's economic and trade engagement with the global south?
Anand, a pleasure to be here again. But China's growth has meant in the previous decade a strong demand for commodities from the south, from natural resource-based products, and this has been quite dynamic for these economies. The question now, exactly at this moment, is the extent to which China will, in its adjustment to the new conditions for the external markets and so on, will remain as such a source of demand. It's important to highlight how the Central Economic Work Conference that was held in December made important, using its words, upholding the leading role of domestic demand and establishing a great domestic market as a priority for this year. And so in doing so, the demand for products from the other southern countries might remain strong. The doubt is always the extent to which the export growth by China will continue, right? Whether the extent to which there will be some change in the path of the renminbi, because there are strong pressures towards a devaluation of an appreciation of the renminbi, and the extent to which as well the property slump, which is set to persist, will be dealt with by the authorities so as to maintain the growth path of China, which is the source of demand for exports from the southern countries.
Ambassador, as you pointed out a moment ago, the Chinese relationship with the Central American countries is very different from those in South America. Let's turn to South America right now. It's a relationship that's very broad and it's one that's growing. Where do you see the potential for growth in that relationship?
Well, I see the potential for growth in that relationship in the transition towards a green economy, in the energy transition. The key point to keep in mind here is the following. South America has some of the biggest copper and lithium reserves in the world. The so-called lithium triangle of Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina is estimated to have some 60% of the world's lithium reserves. Between Chile and Peru, they have somewhere around 30% of the world's copper reserves. Both of these elements are critical for the energy transition. And as we all know, of course, China has been taking the lead in this energy transition, in solar, in wind sources of energy, and of course, in electric vehicles and e-mobility. Now, the point is this. What we need to do is to work together to move away from a situation in which South American nations simply export those products to China, and China then processes them and makes them into manufactured products, to one in which there are greater joint ventures, and we work together on adding value to these products. What is interesting, it seems to me, is that we are seeing that. We are seeing this particularly in Brazil. In 2025, two very important Chinese e-vehicle companies, BYD and Great Wall Motors, opened factories in Brazil. BYD in the state of Bahia. Interestingly enough, in the former industrial park owned by Ford Motor Company, and Great Wall Motors in the state of Sao Paulo, in a factory that used to be run by Mercedes. There's a lesson there. As the United States and Europe move out of South America, Chinese companies are moving in. And again, very much in the right direction, that is adding value to South America's many natural resources. That, it seems to me, is the direction we have to go.
Ottaviano, China has been a champion of globalization and of multilateralism, it supports open trade. Now, at a time like this, when we see some countries, particularly the United States, looking inward, putting up protectionist barriers, how important is the Chinese approach?
It's fundamental that the push for trade integration is extended along the lines highlighted by the ambassador. That is to say, the installment of refinement capacities in the South American countries, for instance, so as to add value simply to the simple extraction of critical minerals and rare earth. Brazil is the second largest potential source of rare earth, but as the ambassador said it quite well, the necessity is to add value to those exports. And it's inevitable that we're going to see this. We are watching, and this is probably an important dimension on the recent push from the United States on Venezuela. It's the access to critical minerals. It's not simply a question of oil. And the fact of the matter is that the countries will have to, in South America, will have to navigate and make sure that they are not excluded, they are not segregated, and they do not have to make any option between the two sources of investments and technology. So the key word is adding value to the extraction of critical minerals and rare earth in the region. That's an obvious way by which the trade with China and with the U.S. as well might prosper.
Ambassador, on the issue of Venezuela, I mean, we've seen the United States stage this military assault on Venezuela, and now President Trump says that he will take full control of Venezuela's oil. I mean, how concerned should nations around the world be when we see something like this? I mean, what are the implications for the global supply of oil and the U.S. desire to control that supplier? It also wants to control shipments, and most importantly, it wants to control how consumer nations pay for that.
Yes, they should be very concerned. I think this is a throwback to an earlier era of empire and of colonialism. I don't think it will work. The realities of the world, we live in a globalized and interdependent economy. This mercantilistic approach that the United States should take charge of the Venezuelan oil industry and then demand that with certain income streams from that oil, Venezuela should only buy U.S. products. I mean, this is really, it's got nothing to do with the way the 21st century global economy works. I think these are, fireworks that are being put out, but they will not work out. The reality of the world is that we need to work with each other. We are all, dependent on each other. And it seems to me that the message in this country, the message that's coming out of China in terms of championing free trade, championing multilateralism, is very much the way forward. We have just heard that the United States will abandon, I think, 60-some multilateral bodies. I mean, this is not the way forward. The world has many, many challenges, many problems, and this unilateral approach will simply not work.
Ottaviano, one of the major changes we've seen in U.S. trade policy over this past year is, of course, the imposition of those Trump tariffs. We remember the day when he announced them to most of the world, Liberation Day as it was called. What kind of impact have those tariffs had on the global south?
The impact has been, let's say, a bit limited by the fact that many southern countries, as the case of Brazil, for instance, found alternative spots to increase its exports. But nonetheless, one cannot deny that the impact has been, in net terms, negative. This approach of this protectionist approach taken by the U.S. Had a negative impact on the GDP growth of many countries in the region, even though not dramatically bad. Among other reasons, because there was some Mr. Trump always chickens out in the sense that some of those tariff increases were reversed. Now, the important point is the following, since you were approaching the case of Venezuela and so on. We might have different stakes of this struggle, this dispute between U.S. and China in the region. The reality differs from country to country. There might be some of the countries in the region that might be, let's say, willing to take any option and so on, whereas others not. I don't see countries like Brazil and Chile, for instance, accepting to discriminate against Chinese investments in order to favor U.S. investments. So the dispute will not be, let's say, with one country, one source of capital in detriment to the other. To be seen how it unfolds.
Ambassador Heine, I want to get back to something you talked about a moment ago, and that is this withdrawal by the United States from dozens of international organizations. As you have pointed out, this unilateral approach is not sustainable in the long run, especially at this time in the 21st century. Two of the organizations that the U.S. withdrew from is the International Energy Forum as well as the International Renewable Energy Agency. Now, we already know that China is a leader in alternative sources of energy, green energy, that is. So do you see China's role now expanding?
Well, certainly. And here, of course, we have to keep in mind the following. At this point, we have two very different approaches to the energy challenges the world faces. Right now, the United States is very much promoting the use of fossil fuels, which, some would say is very much, the wave of the past. And on the other hand, China has been pushing the energy transition, e-mobility, and, the transition towards a green economy, using, wind, solar, e-mobility, and other sources. In that sense, it seems to me that the message is crystal clear. What China is putting on the table is the wave of the future. And on the other hand, fossil fuels are very much a legacy of the past.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Ambassador Jorge Heine, Ottaviano Canuto, thanks to both of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm your host, Anand Naidu, in Washington, D.C. If you have comments or questions you want us to follow up on, please leave a comment in the app or email heatpodcast@cgtnamerica.com. And if you'd like to support the show, the best way is simply to share it with someone who might enjoy it. See you next time.